Some villains came at Dexter with threats and violence. The ice truck killer didn't need to. He let Dexter come to him, step by step, crime scene by crime scene, and by the time Dexter realized what was happening, he was already a part of the plan. In this video, I'm going to break down why Brian Moser, the ice truck killer, is Dexter's most terrifying villain. His murder ritual was cold, calculated, and symbolic. Even if you take nothing else into account, Brian Moser's killing method is quite literally one of the most disturbing elements in the entire Dexter series. His approach was fundamentally different from other villains because his focus wasn't on taking lives. That wasn't what made him tick. No. His whole plan was a psychological attack designed to penetrate the walls Dexter had built around his consciousness and bring to the surface memories he had suppressed for decades, something no one else was ever able to do. Unlike Trinity, who killed to satisfy a compulsive cycle, or Jordan Chase, who murdered for power and dominance, Brian's victims were never actually the point. They were just props in an elaborate show with an audience of one, and he went to extreme lengths for the show.
Guess you haven't heard of the electric chainsaw.
This is something we saw from the very first kill. The first body wasn't left buried or hidden. It was put on display inside a public pool bathed in blue light and chlorine. A series of neatly dismembered body parts floated. A head, arms, legs, all wrapped tightly in plastic. The remains were completely drained of blood, extremely precise, as if someone had purposely sterilized them all for an autopsy. Seeing this as an isolated event is pretty horrifying in itself, but when you look at the grand scheme of things, this was a sinister breadcrumb leading us all to a much darker end. None of his kills were messy. They were well thought out and staged to send a message to his brother. The thing is, the ice truck killer didn't select victims for their moral failings or personal significance. None of that mattered. He chose them for how useful they would be in his greater design to reach Dexter, and he only got worse with time. He began with simple dismemberments, left in places Dexter would be called to as a forensic specialist. He would walk up to crime scenes, unlike anything Miami had ever seen before. The ice rink case, where Dexter found 5 severed fingerprints frozen beneath the surface, was just another one of Brian's horrifying moves. This was an ice rink they used to skate at as kids, an innocent memory used as inspiration for the end of someone's life. If that wasn't direct enough, the mismatched nail prints on each finger were a direct nod to their mother. When these failed to fully awaken Dexter's memory, Brian became chaotic. Doll heads were placed on bodies, limbs arranged in strange ways, and carefully selected location drops that were subconscious callbacks to their shared childhood trauma. Each piece he created was more detailed than the last, designed to penetrate deeper into Dexter's psyche.
I waited a long time to meet you.
This psychological attack reached its climax in the blood-stained hotel room, in a scene that actually ended up being a trigger for all the vivid memories Dexter didn't even know he was holding on to. The room was drenched in blood, later revealed to have come from 5 different bodies. Even though none of the bodies were actually in the room, just the blood, it was enough to bring back the gore he witnessed as a child. Brian forced Dexter to physically step back into his formative trauma by recreating their mother's brutal murder. The warm blood on the walls and the floor were the key to unlocking Dexter's fragmented past, bringing his origin story into his present consciousness faster than he could have ever expected. Brian was attempting nothing less than the complete psychological rebirth of his brother, something he thought Dexter really needed, one without Harry's code. If you're already hooked, make sure to hit that like button and show your support, and don't forget to subscribe with notifications turned on so you never miss the next deep dive into Dexter's darkest villains. Only Brian forced Dexter to question whether his entire existence was built on a fundamental lie, whether the monster was not just part of him but his truest self. And he didn't just do it all from the outside. The manipulation of Dexter and Deborah, a master of deception. Brian Moser took his psychological warfare to an art form through his manipulation of both Dexter and Deborah Morgan. Unlike other villains who confronted Dexter directly, Brian orchestrated an infiltration of Dexter's inner circle. That level of control made physical threats totally unnecessary. His true power was his ability to move both siblings like chess pieces in a game they didn't even know they were playing. The creation of Rudy Cooper was so insane, it should be a masterclass in strategic deception.
Maybe Rudy was right. You never can truly know anyone.
Brian created a persona specifically designed to appeal to Deborah's vulnerabilities, attentive where others have been dismissive, stable where others have been chaotic, and devoted where others have been uncommitted. He was the perfect man she'd been waiting for. Deb never really got the love she wanted from anyone around. Her father pretty much dismissed her. Her co-workers didn't think she was as good as they were, even though she'd proven herself in the male-dominated space over and over again without fail. This was a girl who just needed the right guy to really see her for as great as a person as she was. Every interaction was calculated to strengthen his position within the Morgan family while gathering intelligence on his true target, and it worked perfectly. Within the first 6 episodes, he's gotten so close to her that she literally called him the best thing that has ever happened to her. She didn't even think twice before agreeing to move in with him. Little did she know, she was saying yes to the most sought after murderer in Miami at the time. It was crazy how he maintained perfect emotional control while appearing completely genuine. He studied Deborah's insecurities and desires, mirroring exactly what she needed while feeling nothing. Brian's ability to mimic emotion was disturbingly good. He could fake warmth, concern, and even love, and made people believe it. Unlike Dexter, who often stumbled through forced smiles and awkward small talk, Brian had complete control. He could inspire real feelings in others while staying entirely disconnected himself. As the relationship progressed, Brian started putting himself closer to Dexter and created opportunities for casual observation without anyone suspecting anything at all. He engineered conversations that subtly probed Dexter's psychological defenses while planting seeds of doubt about his constructed identity. He studies his brother's mannerisms and patterns during family gatherings and informal interactions, gathering intelligence that would prove devastating when he finally used everything he'd gathered on him. This gave him a huge advantage over Dexter because Brian became a big part of his life, something no one else was ever able to do. Brian joined Dexter for a friendly dinner, ate with him, bonded with him. He earned the Morgans' complete trust, creating a situation where Deb was starting to get jealous of him and Dexter spending time together. From both sides too. On one hand, she wanted Rudy to spend more time with her and have her on his mind all the time. And on the other, she couldn't stand how Dexter had an easier time opening up to him than he ever had with her. Playing both of them at the same time, all while orchestrating a series of murders designed to awaken Dexter's true nature. At first, this was easy too, but towards the end of the season, we also see the lengths he was willing to go to keep his identity hidden. When Angel Batista came close to uncovering his true identity, he didn't hesitate and stabbed him, and proceeded to go back to being Dexter's friend like it was no big deal. This dual existence showed a level of compartmentalization that even Dexter, who was a master of the double life, found terrifying. It was a betrayal, but more than that, it was shocking. For Deb, it destroyed her belief in her own judgment and capacity for meaningful connection. For Dexter, it was proof that someone existed who could match his deceptive capabilities while exceeding his own emotional control, which was far more disturbing. Brian fooled the Miami Metro and the 2 people that closely worked with criminals every single day, but still didn't see it. He kidnapped Deborah right after proposing to her, and in that one night, he gave her everything she had been hoping for, and then ripped it right out of her hands. He had built her trust up, only to end up using it as bait, and she walked right into his trap. He knocked her out, wrapped her in plastic on Dexter's kill table, and with that, a test designed to force Dexter into a choice that would define his true nature.
You can't be a killer and a hero. It doesn't work that way!
Brian never needed to kill Deborah himself. Her death would only have meaning if it came by Dexter's hand, symbolizing his complete rejection of Harry's artificial constraints and full embrace of his blood brotherhood. What do you think? Was Brian Moser the most manipulative villain Dexter ever faced? Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and if you're enjoying the breakdown, give the like and subscribe buttons a quick tap if you haven't already. Brian offered Dexter unconditional acceptance of his darkest nature, something he had never really experienced, but only if he sacrificed the one person who has shown him unconditional love. This impossible choice went beyond anything a simple villain would do. It was existential torture, designed to break Dexter at his deepest psychological fault line. Dexter's ultimate refusal to kill Deborah represented his first authentic moral choice, not guided by Harry's code, but by a genuine human connection. Dexter's final decision to not kill Deborah was his first truly moral decision, driven by a sincere human connection rather than Harry's code. And yet, this victory came at the cost of rejecting the only person who could have truly understood him for who he truly was. By choosing to protect Deborah, Dexter paradoxically ensured that he would remain isolated in his true nature forever. For Deborah, the whole thing was so traumatizing that she just changed. Her emotional sensitivity turned into defensive cynicism, her trust was broken, and her faith in her own judgment was ruined. Even as she eventually recovered and found new relationships, the shadow of Rudy Cooper's betrayal influenced her approach to intimacy and trust until the very end of her life. The ice truck killer was terrifying for what he did do to Deb and his body count, but worse was the reality that he was Brian Moser, Dexter's biological brother and psychological twin. Brian and Dexter, a horror story of brothers. Their blood connection changes him from a standard villain into something far more disturbing, a living embodiment of what Dexter might have become without Harry's intervention. Brian embodied a different kind of horror that didn't come from violence, but from forcing Dexter to face how fragile his sense of self really was, and how much of it had been built on things that could easily fall apart. The foundation of this horror story began with their shared origin. Both brothers witnessed the same traumatic event, their mother's brutal murder in a shipping container, where they sat in pools of her blood for days before being discovered. This trauma created the same psychological conditions in both boys, planting the seeds for their homicidal tendencies. The realization that haunted Dexter upon discovering Brian's existence was that the only meaningful difference between them was circumstance. Dexter was adopted by Harry Morgan and given a structured outlet for his darkness, while Brian was abandoned to institutions where his impulses festered unchecked. As Dexter pieced together Brian's identity through the clues left in each murder tableau, he confronted a question more terrifying than any physical threat. Am I only who I am because of Harry's code? Without it, would I be exactly like Brian? It challenged the idea that Dexter was in control at all, that everything he believed made him different from Brian might just be learned behavior, built on top of the same instincts they both started with.
I had never forgotten the day that we were born.
Each kill in Brian's spree served as a stepping stone towards their inevitable reunion. Unlike other antagonists who saw Dexter as an enemy or an obstacle, Brian saw him as his only true family, the one person who could understand him completely. There's tragedy in Brian's perspective. He didn't consider himself a villain at all, but rather a liberator attempting to free his brother from what he perceives as psychological imprisonment. Destroying Dexter was never his true goal. His only goal was to rebuild the bond he believed they were meant to have, free from the limits of Harry's code. Which brings me to the final confrontation between Dexter and Brian, which carried more emotional weight than any moment in the series. What made it unforgettable was the silence between them. When Dexter made the choice to kill Brian instead of Deborah, the most unsettling part was that Brian didn't resist at all. He didn't beg, he didn't lash out, he just stood there, calm and still, wearing a look that said everything. There was no anger, just a kind of disappointed understanding. In that last moment, Brian still seemed to believe Dexter might choose him, and realized he never would. That expression stayed with Dexter long after the moment had passed. Other villains came and went over the years, bringing their own kind of chaos, but Brian's shadow never left because he was unique. His death didn't close a chapter, it opened a wound that never fully healed. No one else got that deep inside Dexter's head, and no one else stayed there the way Brian did. In the Nebraska episode in season 6, Brian reappeared as a manifestation of Dexter's subconscious, urging him to abandon the code and embrace unrestricted killing.
Brian Moser, my dead brother. It's been a long time since I've seen him.
This psychological resurrection confirmed what had been implicit throughout the series, that Brian's influence was never truly exorcised from Dexter's mind. The ice-struck killer remained eternally present as the voice of temptation, the path not taken, the brother who offered complete acceptance at the cost of complete abandonment of restraint. What made Brian more terrifying than anyone Dexter faced afterward was the way his presence forced Dexter to ask questions he never wanted to face. Was he always meant to become a killer? Did Harry's code actually save him, or just give him permission to keep killing with a clear conscience? Brian didn't try to expose Dexter or hurt the people he loved. He pulled the floor out from underneath his feet and left him wondering if he ever really known who he really was. Later villains tried to ruin Dexter's life, but Brian went after his identity. He made Dexter confront the idea that maybe there was no moral version of himself to hold on to. Maybe the only real difference between them was timing, who got to him first, and what rules were taught to follow. And if that's all that ever separated them, then the line Dexter had spent years walking was fragile enough to snap at any time. The murder ritual, the manipulation, and his literal identity combined are what make the ice truck killer, without question, Dexter's most terrifying villain. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe with notifications turned on, and I'll see you in the next video about Sergeant Dokes knowing Dexter was a serial killer.